Hello guys, welcome back to ESPN's Football Forecast with myself, James Allcott, Nubaid, Haroon and Kweku Afari, ready to dive into lots of talking points, starting with the situation at Spurs, who 24 hours ago were ready to go. Hang on a minute, these guys could win the title. Now they lose a game pretty badly to Man United, and there are doubts again that Spurs could be, sorry Tottenham fans, Spursy. Nubaid, let's talk about this. How do you feel about not just Spurs, but Antonio Conte's Spurs, after what is overall a very, very good start to the season for them?
I don't see too many similarities. Actually, the opposite similarities. I see too many similarities to Mourinho Spurs. I think there's still an over-reliance on Son and then obviously Kulusevski. Defensively, I think they're better, but just because they're boring. Everything's still really simple. It's sort of like hook it clear as fast as possible. And then all United did was, can we get Lisandro Martinez on Kane? Just stop the ball getting into Kane. And Lisandro Martinez, for a small guy, did a very good job.
Yes.
Shout out the small guys. And then I think Son, they're just going to get Son in the game. So this is another classic case of Conte hoping that something happens. And then when nothing happened, I mean, he brought on Sessegnon at right wing back when he has Perisic, who's right-footed, playing left wing back. Sessegnon can't use his right foot.
Well, there's been a few instances of this where the substitutions haven't arrived soon enough, or they've made a very clear message. I'm thinking about the Arsenal game where he made those changes, which was to sort of save him and save the team for the Champions League games. What should be the priority for Conte at this moment in time? Because actually they're very close to getting through that Champions League group, and if they do that, then that's great. But I guess the question then becomes, you know, what is the ceiling for Tottenham this season? Because although those big games, that the spotlight is always bigger in those games. It's Chelsea, it's Arsenal, and it's the Man United game. Those all were away games, so they've still got to play all those guys at home, and it's still pretty tight at this moment in time. So I'm sort of jumping about a little bit here, but obviously for them to not be Spursy anymore, they need to win something. Yeah. So what's the best chance for a trophy this season when it comes to Spurs?
Well, the priority is probably away from looking at the end goal in terms of winning a trophy and sorting out their team and their tactics. They've lost the midfield battle in all those big games we talked about. Against Chelsea, lost midfield battle against Kante and Jorginho, and Mount were dropping as the extra man. And Bentancur and Højbjerg are good players in their own right, but when you see them against Arsenal, and it was Partey, and obviously Xhaka took a bit more of an advanced position, Odegaard dropped in there, it was a bit more fluid, and they were outnumbered in the midfield. You look at Manchester United, again, Casemiro and Fred could not be slept on. That's a midfield pivot that could possibly start for Brazil in the World Cup.
Crazy.
Yeah, which is absolutely mad. They start for Manchester United. And I just don't think Bentancur and Højbjerg have got the legs to play the way that Conte wants to play. Conte's teams have been predicated on a strong midfield, great wing backs, and then he relies on the individual brilliance of their attackers. The midfield hasn't worked. We saw Basuma start against Manchester United. He hasn't found his legs in this Tottenham team. Conte's been quite outwardly critical of Basuma. He hasn't been able to onboard his messaging. So I think sorting out their midfield is their biggest issue. And like I said before, the wing-back areas as well are important areas for Spurs.
Because I was looking into the stats for this a little bit, and if you look at how many shots teams are conceding, Tottenham are right at the top of that. 20 shots more than the next worst. 144 shots so far. So 122, I think it is, for the next worst placed team. That's a huge problem, isn't it? But if you look at the data set that we have in terms of that 3-5-2, you've got the Everton game where it turned it on its head for them. But against those better teams, like a Man United, who actually have had their own midfield problems, you know, he played that three in the midfield, and Man United still had too much for them. So how do you stop the opposition having that many shots, or is that even a problem?
Well, I think Conte probably goes, we've conceded 12 goals this season, and Hugo Lloris played relatively well.
And their overall XG isn't actually that bad.
Yeah, and they create a lot of chances. The problem for Conte at the moment is in them wide areas, Perisic isn't the best defender, but he's been asked to defend essentially. And even against United, you could see that when he went forward, he was kind of like at a loss because he was like, I don't actually know what the plan is. So I don't think Conte's going to be too concerned with how many shots are sort of going in that direction. I think what he'll be concerned with is the ball's not getting from midfield to attack. It was so bizarre against United. They were picking the ball up and Casemiro would just stand in the way and they'd just kick it against him. And then the reaction would be like, yeah, all good, we've got a throw in. and then nothing happens from the throw in. It's sort of very stop-start. Their away record is terrible. They played West Ham away, it's 1-1. West Ham dominated that game as well. I think Rice got man of the match in that one. Then Brighton away, which they won 1-0, but Brighton were Brighton are better than every team they play. They just got them forward.
Facts.
But they really do struggle on the road, and I think that is a case of Højbjerg isn't. I wouldn't say he hasn't got the legs, but he's not going to be everywhere.
That's the thing. I think that's the thing when it comes to the 3-5-2. I like it.
Yeah.
But what I was saying in the summer when everyone's going crazy about the transfers that had come in, I was still thinking you still need a Maddison, Tillemans, or an attacking 8 to play in that 3. Because at the moment you've got Skip, when you want to use him, if you want to use him, Bentancur, Højbjerg, who got a goal, and both of those players actually in that Everton game were able to get that little bit higher up. But neither of those players really want to play in that position.
But if you look at the Everton game, Everton are also a team that are willing to relinquish possession. So, of course, they're going to get a little bit more joy in that game. Where I worry for Spurs is they've got Newcastle on the weekend, and that's going to be difficult because Newcastle, despite the fact that Eddie Howe's normally lauded as being an attacking manager, they're quite pragmatic.
Yes.
They've got the best defensive record in the league. So I've struggled to see how Spurs are going to break them down. They lack that creativity, and obviously hindsight's a wonderful
Is that
thing.
bodies as well? Is that, Kulusevski being out, Moura's still sort of making his way back?
Kulusevski being out is huge for them. Obviously got injured on international duty for Sweden, and he can drop deep and make things happen. And if you ask Antonio Conte, if you go back to the Arsenal game, did you get the tactics right? I think he would say, yeah. There was little moments in that game where, and I've seen it as a Chelsea fan where Conte was manager of our team, where they have to capitalise on their moments and they rely on individual brilliance of their
especially away from
players.
home, right?
Away from home. Son didn't pick the pass at the right time sometimes that Arsenal game. And I think without Kulusevski in that team, they've lost that kind of fluidity going forward, which has obviously affected everything else. But it always comes back to the midfield. That's where games are won and lost in the Premier League, and they haven't got a good enough midfield.
The thing is, they take on Newcastle, who are probably the most dominant team in midfield. They genuinely have just constant legs, and they win all their battles in there, the second balls, and because you've got Joe Linton, who's probably what Spurs kind of need in the sense of legs, that actual legs. Because Højbjerg and Bentancur they're not bombing around, which is why Bruno Fernandes was just sort of standing around and popping the ball, and they just couldn't get near him. And then you've got Basuma, who just hasn't settled. I don't know if the plan for Conte is to play him as an advanced 8, but that's not really Basuma's game. And then you come up against Bruno Guimaraes, who is, boy, you love him. Go on, I'll give this to you.
Well, yeah, he's gorgeous. I mean, he's absolutely gorgeous
Incredible.
in every single way that you can imagine. But no, he is. He's gorgeous. And the bleach hair, it works. I'll put it out there. And no, his passing ability is his ability to be press-proof. You guys know I love my average positions. He's also got this little bubble around him, and that's what the best players have. And actually, we talk about the defensive side when it comes to Newcastle. They're turned into a bit of like an Atletico Madrid. You can see Eddie Howe's obviously, he went and saw what he was doing there, Simeone, and he's obviously taken a lot of it. This is the big question for me. Big question for the comments as well. What is the ceiling here for Spurs? Now, we know there's going to be injuries, but we also know this is a Tottenham team, like those sort of bigger sides that have overall depth in their squad, but they've also got a lot of games as well. What is the ceiling for Tottenham this year?
I think in the Premier League, the ceiling is 3rd, I think.
So all's well. We just wasted 8 minutes.
Yeah, I think that is the ceiling for them. But obviously the floor is way lower, especially because of how competitive the league is. But in cup competitions, and I said this at the beginning of the season, Spurs have set up perfectly for Champions League 2-legged affairs where Conte is a defensive manager. There's attacking players that can capitalise on moments. So in cup competitions, I think they could get a bit more success. In the league, I think 3rd is the highest they can hope for.
I totally agree. Do you agree?
Conte hates Europe.
Yeah, that's the issue. That is the issue.
So they've got the players, and Son embodies everything you need in Champions League football. He's a killer winger on a counter, but Conte will pie off Europe as soon as they come up against anyone half decent. Even in their group, they've been scraping past teams just because the group isn't great. So they probably go, we're out of Europe. We're 3rd or 4th in the league. They've got to go for a cup competition, go for the FA Cup, go for the Carabao Cup, because if they don't go for that under Conte, they don't win either of those, what are they doing?
Yeah.
Big questions, guys. What is the ceiling for Tottenham? What's the point if they're just going to be 3rd and they're 3rd right now? Let us know. Big questions. Let us know in the comments down below.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.